I would be lying if I said I wasn't totally looking forward to this conversation for many, many months now when we first talked about this back in March. But first, Tyler, tell the people who you are.
Well, my name is Tyler Goldberg. Did you get that, Kate? It's Tyler Goldberg. No, I'm just playing. I'm the Director of Political Strategy at Assembly. We are Stagwell's omni-channel global media agency. Basically what that means is I help oversee our political practice on behalf of candidates and issue groups. I also run our advocacy consulting practice. So wear a lot of different hats.
Okay. So what are some of the main core differences that you see between the political buying and commercial buying that most of us folks in here have?
I mean, it's the speed and the intensity. So I've done the math. I have data. It averages out to a generally sort of normal workload over the course of a year. Tends to be backloaded into a few months. So I have pulled 400-hour months before. I have, the amount of money you see going into political the last maybe 3 months of an election cycle, it's just on a pace that, there are no upfront deals. There are no, real planning a year out. It's hit the ground running. It's very, very active and reactive.
So we have midterms and we have presidential elections often. What is making 2026 so special or scary? Your pick on that word.
I'm going to cut it right down the middle and say intense.
Okay.
A couple of things. Think about it like a weather person forecasting a hurricane season ahead. You have all of these factors that are coming together that will serve to make it the most expensive non-presidential election cycle in history. Bit of context, last year in the presidential cycle, we saw around $11.5 billion worth of political spend. We're going to be sitting above $10 billion in 2026. So almost
just for a midterm.
Just for a midterm. A lot of things go into that. I won't bore you going over the 7,000 elections that will be occurring in this country in the next year. But it really is where and when these races will be at their most intense. We're looking at some of the most expensive Senate races that we will ever see. I mean, I'm thinking there could be 2 or 3 Senate races. These are just one campaign at a time, getting over $500 million worth of spend. So depending on when and where you are advertising, you got to watch out.
Okay, so we have $10 billion, another B, if
Another
anyone
B.
is keeping track, right? Flooding the market. Is this all happening in this like September to October timeframe, or how can we expect that to happen?
So you would think so, right? Except no. The answer is no. So that's obviously when political spending is at its height. If you live, I know we got some North Carolina folks here. I know we have some Georgia folks here. I'm looking at Robin. You will be seeing a lot of wall-to-wall advertising for political in the fall. But there are other places where you wouldn't necessarily expect huge amounts of political spend that will be seeing it at different times of the year. So I know we have some Tennessee folks in here. You guys have a pretty competitive governor's primary on the Republican side. You'll be seeing the bulk of your political spend in the spring and summer, not in the fall. And so again, this is not to scare anyone here who's a brand or an agency, but it's across the country. It's not just these are the swing states. These are where we think it'll be busy. I live in New York City, certainly not a swing market politically. We're projecting New York City to be one of the most intense DMAs for political spending because of the congressional races.
So is this just going to impact people who are buying at a local level, or if we're buying nationally, do we have to consider this as well?
So it's interesting, right? Because most political is local. I'm not doing a cheeky cliche saying, but most political media is local. However, what we found in some of our research is that it's not just the political spend that will affect your media strategy. It's not just saying, well, I am doing a campaign in Atlanta in October. So first of all, good luck with that. But second of all, it's more about the contextualizing this creative, right? So your consumers are going to be seeing that $10 billion worth of political advertising, and it actually has been shown to have an effect on their consumer habits. big research we did in 2022 showed that at the time, Republicans were seeing and getting exposed to a lot more messaging about inflation in the economy. In 2022, Republicans were almost twice as likely to cut back on discretionary spending than Democrats. So if you were a brand that was targeting people that, populations that may lean more conservative on a whole, you were seeing some pretty scary numbers because of the political cycle, outside of the fact that, our CPMs went up 40% or whatever it was.
So am I safe to assume then the inverse is going to happen with this, that the Democrats are going to now pull back on their discretionary spending because they think the economy is shit?
I would think so. We want to let it sort of percolate a little more, see how the, I think the fundamentals of the economy are probably worse now than they were back in 2022. So we will have to see how that does. But yeah, that's our expectation, is that if you're going after more of a traditionally liberal-leaning demographic, you got to be careful, because that's going to be people who are seeing disproportionately more advertising on the economy, because your political affiliation in sort of a doom loop of sorts kind of identifies what political ads you're going to see. So if I'm a Democrat, I'm more likely to see Democratic ads.
Right. Okay, so we're going to have creative fatigue,
Yep.
right? Because there's going to be a lot of messages in the market. $10 billion flooding the media landscape. I think everyone's ears were like, great, awesome. It's going to cost so much more for me to run. Any good news you can tell us, Tyler?
I mean, good news is it's democracy in action. No, it's interesting, because the good news is you don't just have to sit back and watch this affect your media strategy. There are concrete steps you can take. And going back to your creative fatigue question, second Robin Porter shout out of the panel, we did some excellent research with LoopMe last year that showed not only were people sort of having this visceral reaction to ads because of what political ads they were seeing, but they were more likely to tune out non-political ads. How many people here, again, if you live in a swing state, have ever looked at a commercial break and it has been all political ads? And you just want to go, I fucking hate seeing these.
Woo, first F-bomb of the day.
I'm here. Hey, you're withholding lunch from me right now. No, I'm kidding. But that's the thing. If you are in that mindset where you're like, I cannot stand these political ads, you're going to turn off all advertising you see in that commercial break.
I don't even have anything. I'm just sad by what's going to happen.
The thing that advertisers can do and really should be doing, I hate homework from a meeting, I hate homework from a conference, and all the agency folks are going to hate what I'm about to say, but if you're a brand, you need to be going and talking to your partners now and saying, what is our exposure to political disruption? How exposed are we, and what can we do to prevent it?
Okay. So it's going to be more expensive. There's going to be more ads. But isn't political advertising typically sanctioned for linear, right? That's where most of the dollars are going.
Sure.
So is it safe to assume that the other channels are fair game, or do you think it's going to kind of disseminate across all of the platforms that we have at our disposal?
It's a combination. That sort of concept of exposure is what I've been looking at most this year, and the exposure isn't just when and where, as we've talked about, but it's how you're advertising. So if Netflix, for example, is a huge part of your advertising plan, they don't accept political ads. So generally speaking, you'll be fine on Netflix.
Good for Netflix.
That's good for Netflix. I generally think most platforms should accept political ads, but that's just
I'm shocked
I'm
that you have that
unbiased
opinion.
in that. So it's I think everyone and every platform should accept it. But so that's an example of maybe we have less exposure. But if you were looking to sort of do media testing in a market, you got to analyze what that market's going to be going through. And it may not just be big Senate race or a big governor's race. It may be a local ballot initiative that's gotten people really, really riled up. California, this year in 2025, has a very high-profile redistricting amendment to their constitution. That again, your consumers are going to be feeling this. And as we've seen, election cycles get longer and more expensive year after year after year. You're getting to the place, and I hate to say this is really depressing, of a perpetual political cycle. And that is, we need to start factoring in small p politics to our media plans.
So, are there channels that you're going to see more political advertising over invest in outside of linear then?
Yeah, I mean, live sports is going to be huge. So anything that's touching live sports, because it's a really good way to get in front of a lot of people. But those tentpole moments used to not be as attractive to political because the money wasn't there, right? So it was way less likely that you would see, a Super Bowl ad for a presidential candidate. Last year we saw two. Like it's the mind-boggling amount of, like, I can't really describe how crazy these spend totals have gotten. And so, yeah, we may see more than one $500 million Senate race. We may see, a dozen $50, $60 million House races. I've done this for 10 years. If you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said that sounds ridiculous.
Yeah. So you made the comparison, $10 billion will flood the market next year for these midterms.
Mm-hmm.
There was about $11 billion spent on that presidential election.
Sure.
How much money was spent on the last midterm cycle?
That's a great question. Yeah, about a little over 9.5, I believe. I'll double check the exact number, but we're projecting 15% increase. Now, there's a reason for that, and people think of political cycles as either 2 or 4 years. Political cycles are really 8 years if you think about it, because most political offices at the state level are 2-term limited. So if you look at, you're not just going to have a ton of competitive governor's races this year, you're going to have a ton of competitive open governor's races, which means huge amounts of money on primaries on both sides of the aisle. My favorite example, going back to Georgia, Georgia has runoff elections in both their primary and their general. So if you think that come November 5th, you're done in Georgia seeing political ads, I unfortunately, for my friends who live in Georgia, have bad news for you in that you're going to be seeing political ads for another month, especially if you remember 2020, this control of the Senate was on the line. So it was something, I don't remember the exact, it was like $100 million on those 2 Senate runoffs in 6 weeks.
Tyler, you're quickly becoming my least favorite person here.
But that's why I do it with such, verve and zhuzh. Gotta put a pretty face on these dour numbers.
Okay, so consumer creative fatigue, everything is going to be more expensive. There's no way to predict when, how, what, and who at this point. You obviously live and breathe this every day. You've been doing this for 10 plus years. We all have other jobs to do.
Sure.
There's no way one other human brain can think about all of these different aspects. So who do we turn to solve these problems?
It's a great question, and this is not a self-pat on the back, but it's folks who...
We just turn to you?
Yeah, we just turn, my business card's over there. You really want to work with partners who understand that market. On the vendor side, vendors who have done it before, it's important to get that sort of perspective. Ad Impact is a great data aggregator where we do good work with them. They just issued a political outlook report. We have our own commercial advertiser political outlook report. It's going to be coming out in a few weeks. It's really just a matter of being prepared, because you don't want to be in a position where you have a campaign that's going live in Charlotte for the Winter Olympics, and all of a sudden you're dealing with political ads during the Winter Olympics, which, by the way, if you're planning on advertising in Charlotte during the Winter Olympics, you're going to have political ads during the Winter Olympics.
Okay. So it sounds like a good takeaway is just we need to ask our buyers and ask our agency partners and our stations, what's happening? Mm-hmm. What do we need to think about?
Exactly. And, monitoring, because these cost increases, political is mostly reactionary, right? So someone comes in, their opponent comes in, the issue groups come in, all at the same time. So that could be a situation where, in the span of a week, you're seeing a 60, 70% CPM increase. That's how fast we work here, because other than in Georgia, again, not to pick on the state that I love.
Everyone does it.
Other than Georgia, first week in November, it's done. So there are no make goods in political. There is no, we'll get it in our holiday campaign. It is done.
So they're going to spend that money.
They're going to spend that money.
Ad, yeah.
The worst thing you can do as a political media agency is go back with unspent money. That's a no-no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the worst thing that you can do as commercial
Sure.
buyers, because then we don't get it next year.
Exactly.
Right? Like, I spend all of my
Yep.
money in December. I know
It's like
how
that episode
goes.
of The Office where they're talking about the budget surplus.
Exactly. Okay, so what are some of the like best practices from political buying that you could impart on the rest of like the B2C buyers here?
Yeah, it's a lot of research. So in my experience, and Assembly is the only agency that does both commercial and political. All the other political agencies only do political. I used to work at one, they do great work, all that. But one thing I've noticed about the commercial agency space is it's very, very siloed, right? So you have your planners and buyers, your activation folks, you have your strategists, you have all that. Those, I think, divisions don't really talk to each other as much as they should. And when you're talking about political, your buyers may be the first to see that that's happening. And then the research team might be noticing, some spikes here or there. So it's really about open communication. And again, asking those questions. So as I said, first thing you have to do, if you're a brand, and I hate to end with such a positive note, time's kind of running out. We're going to start seeing our first primaries for the 2026 elections, forgetting the fact that if you live in New York City, you got an election coming up in November. New Jersey, Virginia, all have elections coming up in November. But if you are in a swing state or a state that's going to have competitive primaries, March is when those elections are going to happen. So beginning of the year is when you're going to start seeing the bulk of political start. So start planning now. The red lights are flashing, both metaphorically and literally. If you're a brand, talk to your agency. How are we prepared? What's our exposure?
This is great. I love having content that no one can do anything about after this. This has been really helpful for
You know what we can do? We could go to the brewery tour. We could all have about 7 IPAs and go from there.
All right. Let's try to end on a positive
Ending
note
on a
before
positive
we
note.
open it up.
Sure.
What really excites you about this next cycle? Like, what should we be excited about as either consumers or buyers ourselves?
The innovation is starting to pick up. So there was this old adage that political was sort of old-fashioned because the voters were older, right? That's no longer the case, and I don't think it was the case.
They're dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think that was the case back then. But so you're finally starting to see political campaigns, political advertisers take advantage of these innovations that have made all of us, I think, better at our jobs in the commercial space in the past 10 years. Those innovations are starting to shift over to political. So I think we're being more efficient.
Yep.
I think we're being more, targeted. I think we're doing a better job. We're doing better work.
Okay. Questions for Tyler? You've scared them all. Oh no, we have one.
This happened
one
last
here.
time
So,
too.
and Taylor, of
Goodness.
course. Yeah.
Hello, Michelle Strom from Strom and Nelson out of Seattle. And so maybe not the most popular question, but you'd mentioned Netflix, there's no ads. Is it correct that like PBS, NPR, and are there others where there's no ads or political ads?
That's a great question on PBS and NPR. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Amazon Prime doesn't accept political ads. There are more regulations on certain platforms, but the PBS argument, that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure. Do not. Yeah, I would expect they don't, but that's very interesting.
We've got one more over here.
Hi, Casey McLeod from Video Elephant. Given the cost increases that are anticipated throughout the political buying season, do you think brands and agencies could benefit from trying to go more directly to supply or publishers rather than having everything jacked up through the bidding process with DSPs, SSPs, and so on?
That's a great question. I mean, I would think, yeah, there are benefits. I mean, there's also obviously drawbacks to doing that that I think exist regardless of how much spending's around. But yeah, no, that's certainly a strategy you could employ. At the end of the day, it really depends because, I don't know how much that's going to help you in a place like North Carolina, right, which is just going to be wall to wall. But could that make the difference in a place like LA where it's going to be expensive and intense, but not necessarily the most intense? Yeah, I think that's possible.
Okay, one more question.
Okay, so
You didn't say your name, Taylor.
yeah, I'm the question guy. Everybody's heard my name like 5 times, but yeah, Taylor Sutherland for the record. When we think about political strategies and things that we've been doing, Are there any sort of recommendations in terms of day part mix that you would want to evolve during key political windows, or the way that you would think about being more, streaming heavy during certain periods as opposed to maybe being linear heavy? And how's that kind of played out for some of your other clients that are trying to navigate these political waters?
I mean, I think that's a fantastic question, and day part mix is so important. And for the longest time, people would tell you, well, get away from politics, get away from news. I think that's sort of an outdated way of thinking. There is research that shows that people's attentiveness and reception to advertising during news is actually higher than, because they trust the source kind of thing. So I think day part mix is really important. Again, in some of these places, it's not going to matter. You're not going to be able to avoid it. You just have to figure out how to live with it. Yeah. And I think that you can certainly, there are things that can be done. This is not to say pull your money out from any high intensity markets. What it is spend it smartly. Yeah. So yeah, if you're on CNN, prime time in October in a high political market, you're going to be wall-to-wall political, and if you're good with that and that works for you, then great. If not, you may want to think about something else.
All right, time for one more.
Hi, I'm Cheyenne Taylor Hubbard. So I have a question. NRS Digital Media. So I am one of those people that completely tuned out because I knew I was going to vote, and then I'm in a swing state, and then my mother is in Texas. So the Pennsylvania and Texas advertisements on Hulu got a little crazy. It was everything. So as soon as ads happened, I hit mute. How on the political side, are you adjusting for those audiences that are tuning out?
Tuning out from political?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of data that sort of can be used to target people who are more likely to vote, or therefore, I guess, sort of exclude people who are not likely to vote, if that makes sense. So it's being creative about your targeting. ACR is a huge thing, because if you've been sort of receiving your opponent's ads, you can now be targeted and sort of see the ads you want. There are risks in that, and my quick anecdote before we finish up is I'm a giant Mets fan. We talked about this many times if you've spoken to me this week. I was watching the Mets-Brewers playoff series last year, and at that time, it was cheaper for campaigns to buy a national spot than it was to advertise locally in all the Wisconsin markets. So I got targeted with a Wisconsin Senate ad. I can't vote in Wisconsin, lovely state, but kind of a waste. Except the ACR function realized that I had seen the Democrats' ads, and then I saw the Republicans' ad. And then because I saw the Republicans' ad, I got retargeted and retargeted. So there's a lot of risk there, and it's about identifying. That's why I think you're seeing a lot of advertising targeting the bases of both parties, because they're people can vote. The one thing I will say is the biggest surprise elections happen when people who you don't think are going to vote end up voting.
Tyler, we could probably go on for days about this, but alas, I do think that's time. Thank you so much. This
Thank
was
you for
so
having
good.
me.